Hey, I'm Issa and I'm learning to convert this van all by myself while traveling out of it as much as possible. Hey, welcome back to the van build. Today I'm building out an area for my gray and eventually my freshwater tanks. Now I'm trying to keep this build very light, so I generally don't use a lot of 3/4 inch plywood, but here I am because things are going to be adhered to this as well. I also want to use up my scrap pieces of wood. That's another thing I'm doing. So you're going to see that I don't cover the whole area of build just to keep it both light and to use up my pieces of scrap wood. So I measured the hole that the water inlet hatch will protrude through, and then I'm going to cut that here. I start with a pilot hole in the middle first, and then I take my handy dandy, well-loved jigsaw and work that hole the rest of the way through. Oh my gosh, sometimes I say things and I'm realizing how they sound after, but we're gonna keep going with this, okay? So I cut up the hole. Also, anywhere that didn't have plus nuts, I made sure that I added them, and then I used my good old lipstick trick to mark those plus nuts and then press the board, just as I've done many other videos, to those plus nut screws. And then I was able to drill holes in these area, take the screws out, and then screw these boards to the van itself very securely. But before those boards went up, I needed to put a thermal barrier between the metal and the wood. Wood is not a great thermal barrier and it would warm up, so to speak, or be very cool depending on the temperature. And I've come to love this stuff. This is Easy Cool, which is kind of like a relative of Reflectix, if you want to think of it that way, very similar, but not exactly the same. It doesn't require an air gap. The difference between being in the sun, with the sun especially directly shining on the bare metal, versus when I have this Easy Cool applied to the van is huge. When it's a hot day and I touch the bare metal, I can't because I'm going to burn myself. With the Easy Cool, it's just warm to the touch. So I take my well-measured piece to the van, and then I also need to cut out that wheel well. Now that wheel well does already have sound deadening on it, so I'm not too worried about, the thermal barrier there. I just use like an X-Acto knife that came with the kit to cut around the wheel well. It's not perfect. It really doesn't need to be. I'm just trying to get this Easy Cool up against the wall before I put the wood into the plus nuts with the screws already done. I hope that made sense, and if not, watch my other videos and see what you think, eh? Now remember, this was 4 years ago, and this is when I was still actually good and would wear a respirator when I'd spray adhesive or things like that. To be honest, I probably have done some lung damage because after 4.5 years of building out my van, I did eventually just give up on that kind of thing. What I'm doing right here is just poking holes to where the plus nuts are, just so I'll be able to easily get the screws through this thermal barrier. It's not super strong. It can just be a little challenging to find. Now, though, that I'm looking back at this, what I should have done was go ahead and do the adhesive first and then do the holes, because there's just no easy way to find them except by feel. There's a potential here that I could have misaligned things when I did the adhesive. So don't bother doing this step at this point if you're me. Well, I was me and I did this, so don't do what I did. Remember, this is a how I do, not a how to do. Okay, finally getting to the adhesive. This is just some 3M90 adhesive spray. It has to dry a little bit between before you can actually adhere it to itself or to each other. So I sprayed both the van wall and the Easy Cool, waited about 30 seconds, and then I could push it onto each other. Once that happened, I went ahead and screwed in all those scrap pieces of wood that I'll eventually have my water tank shelving system, we'll call it, adhere to. So now I'm really getting into building the kind of tank shelter, we'll call it. I'm starting with a gray tank because I'm doing my water system odd and backwards, quite honestly. The gray tank is going to be under my fresh water tank. My fresh water tank is going to be against gravity when I fill it and above the gray tank, both inside the van. So I'm just taking some 1 inch by 2 inch pieces of wood, doing some Craig holes, pocket holes, that's what they're called, using a Craig jig. And I'd already measured the lengths that I was going to need to surround my gray tank, and I'm going to adhere them all together. I do want to touch on the fact that I'm building this so strange because the whole motivation was to get the tanks inside the van because I knew I wanted to camp and live in places that it could get below freezing. And I wanted to just have my tanks be the same temperature as my van. I know there's heating pads and such. I didn't want to mess with that. The real issue is your pipes. Because they're smaller, the water can freeze faster. But in my build, I have very small amount of pipes. It's actually exposed to the wild, we'll say. There's only a couple of inches of outlet pipe that is exposed to water, so I'm not very concerned about that. And when you make a mess, make sure that you're vacuuming up your sawdust appropriately, okay, folks? Next, I go to grab the actual gray tank itself and put it into its little home. And this is where I'm realizing, oh, I'm going to have to kind of divot out part of this wood because of the spouts or the spigots or whatever those are called. Because otherwise the wood is too tall in the way that I'm building it. So I'm building it with a wider side up here just for some more support. But first, let's just put this thing together. So of course we want to screw and glue, and that's of course what I'm doing. I eventually get it all together and do all the good test fitting and whatnot. But because I have vinyl flooring in the van, I also want to make sure that the vinyl flooring doesn't get punctured. I'm trying to keep everything protected and as waterproof as possible. So the next thing I do is take it outside and grab some of my extra mini cell, which is a closed cell foam thing. Anyhow, I just take that 3M90 adhesive again, and then I just put this at the bottom of this kind of cage that I've built. Something else I haven't mentioned yet, this cage and this whole system I'm designing is I wanted everything essentially to be around the well. So I've made my own personal over the wheel well, fresh and gray water tank holding system. So I bought this gray tank specifically because it is narrow and about the size of my wheel well. Here you can see those notches that I did. And next I need to build a support for the freshwater tank that's going to go over it. So that gray water tank is a 21 gallon, if I remember correctly. It might be 20. And then my freshwater tank is 30 gallons. So that's a lot of water up top, but it is directly above the wheel well. The reason I'm focused on this weight being right over the wheel well is because that is where the van can support the most weight. So the other side, I have my battery bank, which is the other heavy thing I have permanently in the van. This side is going to have the water, so that weight will ebb and flow. On this driver's side of the van, I also have my diesel tank that will ebb and flow. So I'm not going to have an exactly equal van at all times because the liquid is going to change in weight depending how full or empty any of these tanks are at any time. But I am thinking about keeping my weight distributed across the van and on areas that can handle high loads like the wheels. So I take some time and use as much scrap wood as I can to continue to finagle a shelving system / cage system for these components. You can kind of have a sneak peek. See how I've just got the tanks resting behind me over the wheel well? That's essentially what I'm looking to support, but with a bunch of wood instead of just having tanks rest on each other that would break and spill and cause a catastrophe. So I get all the legs cut the way I want, all the smaller pieces. I'm cutting those down with a chop saw. I don't love this chop saw. No matter what I've done, I've not been able to get an actual straight center cut on it, but it was affordable and it gets the job done. The cuts work well enough. After this, I move on to testing everything as I'm cutting them just to see how it works, and then moving to get some plywood and cutting that to size for what we'll call a little running shelf. It's basically just something right on top of the wheel well, and it's just I'm trying to take up space and use up as much space as I can. So that's why I'm cutting components that's going to work in this small little area. And boy, do we love when something actually works out like you want. So there was a handful of cutting, chopping, back and forth, getting all the components ready needed to finish up building my shelf cage. Yes, that's what we're going to call this. This is a shelf cage for your water system in a van. And then I adhered all these components together. So see, this is that running shelf. Now I do eventually put some of that mini cell along the gray water tank in case when that bulges, it doesn't hit it. Just keep that in mind. That's pretty close proximity there. And the reason I put the foam along that side of the board is that tank will kind of expand, and I don't want it to rub against the wood and eventually get a hole in the gray tank, which would be gross. So here's just some shots of what it looks like. It is supported on both sides. It's also supported along that gray tank. You can see here on the side from that wheel well. So it just built a shelf right over it. Now, I don't know why I did it this way, but I decided let's go ahead and polyurethane after the fact, random. Keep in mind the bottom is essentially protected from water because there's both the adhesive and that mini cell, which will not hold onto water. But for some reason, I decided I'm going to go ahead and just water treat all of this wood once it's already in the van. So that's what I've done, and I just put some tape to protect the floor from any of that. I'm looking back at this now, I don't recommend this. Don't know why I did it this way. This is actually super weird. I'm just super weird. But look, I was a novice at this point. I still even consider myself a novice, but I've certainly learned as I've gone through the van build, especially now that I'm looking back at this with the van completely built. And just treat your wood once you have it glued together. Like this is weird. Don't treat it in the van, okay? Learn from my mistakes / oddities. So I think I ended up doing 4 coats on this because I really wanted to make sure it stayed water resistant. I would honestly say add more, do up to 6. I think 4 is recommended, but I would do up to 6. So eventually this dries, and I just want to say thanks for watching this video where it's all voiceover with phone footage. After this, I do have a camera that I start recording with. I think it should get better. Who knows? This is all a learning process, both in editing and recording. So I so appreciate you sticking with me. I'll see you for the next one.